Good morning, everyone. Welcome to The Broad Perspective here on the Broad Perspective Network. We're glad you're with us today. We have a very exciting show. We have a full house today. It's going to be a round table, but our featured guest is Greg Barnes. And our topic of discussion is conspiracies, fact or theory. This could be real interesting because we know that's right down Greg's alley. He has some very interesting insights. So, I'm Vivian Komori, by the way.
I'm Jean Monty.
Jakub Dolezal.
Laura Felice.
Joe Dolezal.
And you never know who else will appear in the studio before this is all said and done. So with that, let's kick it off talking about Fukushima, Greg. I know that's been a subject that's near and dear to your heart. What's going on with Fukushima and radiation, and how is that a conspiracy?
Well, I like to start with saying that it is an issue that is being completely ignored by everyone because it is so scary that people just will not face what is actually happening. And that's got to change. We've got to all rally together. We got to do something. We got to make something happen no matter what it is. And I'm trying to update you guys on all I know as to up to date as to what is going on, including how fishermen are not catching any fish or sardines in the western waters off of Canada and Washington State.
Oh, here.
Yes, here.
Well, I read something just yesterday about the starfish on the western seaboard that are losing their limbs. There's some sort of starfish collapse.
Well, not only are they losing their limbs, but they are actually melting. They are dissolving. Now, you have to think to yourself, what would make starfish start to dissolve and why? And that's where it gets scary.
It is scary. So tell us, what's going on? What's going on with Fukushima? I know they had another quake over there in the last few weeks. It was a pretty serious earthquake. There were tsunami warnings. What is going on? What's the latest on that?
Well, here's my up-to-date on that. As a result of the 7.3 that got downgraded to a 7.1, no major structural damage was actually happened out of it all. But one of the things that did happen that mainstream didn't really cover is they took this, or TEPCO, got to name names. TEPCO took this as an opportunity to do an emergency dump. And so we all know that they have been dumping about 300 tons of radioactive water into the ocean every day. But during this earthquake, or when the tsunami warning, the whole 9 yards, they dumped over 100,000 tons of radioactive water into the ocean because no one was looking.
Who's TEPCO?
TEPCO is the, I can't remember TEPCO. TEPCO is the agency that owns the radioactive power plant in Fukushima Daiichi.
Is it a Japanese corporation?
It is.
Okay.
It is.
Okay.
And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission oversees them, and that's the international body of that monitors radiation activities and energies around the world.
Well, I know you've studied this intensely. So what's the repercussions of this? So they're dumping a lot of radioactive stuff into the ocean. What's the deal? Should we be worried about that?
Yes, we should, because the mainstream version is that this radioactive water is going into the ocean and it's diluting and it's no serious consequences, which is farthest from the truth as possible. The radiation does concentrate in the waters, and the heavier particles, the cesium, the uranium, plutonium, they float to the bottom or sink to the bottom, and they get consumed by the plankton, then the shrimp, and then the small fish, then the bigger fish, and it gets concentrated into the fish that they're selling us.
Oh, so have we had any evidence of that?
That's where it gets tricky, because the United States has decided that there isn't a problem, so there's no need to monitor the food at all.
Really?
Yes, and so they have not commissioned any group or organization or any company to monitor the food. They've deemed it as safe already.
How do we know that it's not?
The only way to know that our food is safe now is by radiation detectors, which on a government level are not being used at all. it is up to individuals, the alternative media, who has been monitoring food all over the place, and they are finding food, milk, the fish, vegetables across the board with higher than normal levels of radiation in them.
When you say higher than normal levels, can you give us some sort of, maybe not numbers, but just some sort of idea what is considered higher? Is it like 100 millionth of 1% higher, or is it much more than that?
Well, I've got some numbers for you.
Okay.
Before the earthquake in 2011, the international standard was 100 counts per minute was deemed as, if you got a count over 100 counts per minute of radioactivity, it was considered unsafe. Shortly after, I think it was a week after the earthquake, the United States changed the regulation to 1,200 counts per minute as safe.
You mean counts per minute or counts per million?
Counts per minute.
Per minute. Oh,
Yeah,
that's how they measure it.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's how they measure it, counts per minute.
Okay, so the United States raised what is safe, and how many are we actually getting?
Well, it varies, and I don't have those, excuse me for not being prepared in that area. I don't have actual numbers from a lot of the alternative media monitoring. But everything is escalated. And we're talking about people measuring higher levels of radiation all the way on the East Coast,
Oh, wow.
in the milk and vegetables. The running joke right now is that it's safer to actually be in Japan than it is to be in North America,
Because
we're downwind.
current.
Yes, we're downwind.
So what's the solution?
Wow. Not being a nuclear physicist, I'm going to have to say that the solution right now would have to be the international community. Oh, and by the way, the United States finally decided to get involved and is providing funding to TEPCO to come up with solutions. So we've got a little positive activity going on, but it's not enough.
Let me ask you this: is TEPCO the company that was introducing the thought that they would be able to freeze? They could put an ice wall off the coast of Fukushima to keep the radiation in? Was that TEPCO?
Yes, that was TEPCO
Okay.
that came up with that idea. And just to shed a little factual light on that, the project that they're talking about for saving Fukushima is building this ice wall. They forgot to tell the public that it's going to take 10 years to build this ice wall. And it will still lose, if there's any loss of power, it will melt. And we're right back in the same ballgame again.
So we're just maybe building the wall for our kids to have to worry about.
We're building a wall that's never been tested, and the theories is that this wall is going to do the same thing as the walls that exist already. It's going to force the water to build up like a dam, and then the water's going to overflow over the dam because it has nowhere else to go. And so we're still going to have the same problem regardless of the ice wall.
And so, Greg, as far as like Fukushima, is there like a critical point or a critical mass where it can get really worse? Like it could, progressively it's still polluting, but is there a place where, or any way to know that it can actually get worse? There be another meltdown or anything that will really go catastrophic that nobody will be able to deny?
That's a great question, and it's a great segue into Reactor 4. Reactor 4 was one of the reactors that exploded, and they got that on film. And at the upper floor of it, I believe it's on the 10th floor of it, is where they housed the MOX fuel, which is spent nuclear fuel. And what it did was the explosion ripped apart all the cranes that allowed them to move this material safely. And so what's happening is Building 4, the amount of MOX fuel that's in the top of Building 4 is the equivalent of 14,000 Hiroshima bombs going off all at once. And the way that they are stored, they are separated by millimeters. And they're going to have to use a conventional crane to try to raise these fuel rods out of the top of this building, which, by the way, is sitting on unstable ground and collapsing on itself very slowly, like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. That's what's happening to that building. And they have to move these nuclear rods without them touching each other, and they're millimeters apart, and they're going to do it with a conventional crane, and that's the only option they have.
That's scary to think about. That's really scary to think about. Now, as far as like Fukushima itself, is that something you think they could sweep under the rug, or is that something we're going to have to really deal with eventually?
Sweeping under the rug.
Will it go away quietly is probably a better question.
Well, you know, with these guys, anything's possible. My research showed me that Fukushima actually had its first nuclear meltdown in '77, and they hid it all the way until they were forced to bring out the information in 2007. So they're good at hiding things. They do that well. Unfortunately, with the magnitude of these three full nuclear meltdowns, you're not going to be able to hide this radiation. Many of the countries bordering the Japanese waters have already banned all seafood from their waters. They are not exporting food from Japan as a result, because they know what is happening.
Well, that's a huge industry for them. Huge industry.
Which is the motivation for hiding all this, is because they're trying to protect the fishing industry as well as protecting nuclear energy all at the same time, which is just mega dollars.
So there's so much going on with a lot of different nuclear plants, like San Onofre. We're having some issues there as well. They closed that down for a while, and to my knowledge, they've opened that back up. Does anybody know that? Have you paid any attention to that, Greg?
No.
It's been closed for sure. It's permanently closed down.
Oh, it is permanently
Yes,
closed
permanently
down.
closed down. It's not going to reopen.
Okay, I did not know that. So how do they dismantle that? Is it the same?
Well, they haven't
problem?
dismantled
They
it.
haven't dismantled it
Yeah,
yet.
they haven't dismantled it. What they've done is decommissioned it, and so it no longer has the authority to operate. So now they have to dismantle it and make it a safe facility, and that takes 20, 30 years to remove all the nuclear material and store it safely and decontaminate everything that was exposed.
So once again, how do we, living here on the West Coast where this show is being recorded, and we are already having word that our waters and our air is already showing signs of radiation, how do we protect ourselves? Yeah, we need to, so we need a Geiger counter. What do we need? A hazmat suit? What do we do? Walk around like Martians, trying to protect ourselves? It's a valid question. I mean, if this is as serious as we're hearing, or as you're saying, and my husband's father, Tomio Komori, was in Hiroshima when we dropped the bomb, and he died of radiation-induced leukemia, and it's not a fun way to die. It's a very, very horrible way to go. So, is that the future for all of us? I mean, if it's that bad, is that what we're looking at?
It's going to be the future for many, and the way that the radiation affects our bodies is that it accumulates over time, and it slowly builds the cancer in your body, and then it will start to show up 5 and 10 years down the road.
Exactly.
And so you asked about solution, and I think what we can do as individuals to protect ourselves is that we have to take the initiative to get radiation detectors for our homes and make it an issue in the store. When enough people see other people in the store monitoring the food, seeing what the radiation levels is, and are able to show people, you know what, I'm not buying this because this is ringing off the charts over here, then that alarm bell is going to ring, and people are going to wake up and see what's going on.
Okay, all that those are good ideas, but how do we stop it from coming? How do we make it better? I mean, if our produce, if it's in the air and it's in the water, well, what are we going to do? It's there. How are we going to have food that isn't radioactive? Do we only buy food that's been grown in a cave somewhere?
Well, this is what makes it so scary. It's kind of just like, as a matter of fact, I was going to say it's kind of like, no, it's just like toothpaste. Once it's out of the tube, there's no putting it back.
Okay, that's an interesting analogy. Well, we're going to put that in our pipe and smoke it for a little bit, and then we're going to take a break. So we'll be back in just a minute with more of the Broad Perspective in our visit with Greg Barnes. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Broad Perspective here on the Broad Perspective Network. We're continuing our visit with Greg Barnes, and when we parted to take a break, we were talking about Fukushima and radiation, etc. One of the things that you mentioned was testing our food, being able to test our whatever atmosphere. And I looked online, and there are a lot of different kinds of radiation detectors, Geiger counters, and they range in price from a little bit less than $100 to thousands actually. How do we know which one to get? Can we do a group purchase through Amazon? I'm just asking. Go ahead.
Well, my research says that the base model radiation detectors are running on the average of about $150. And those will tell you that there is radiation, but it won't tell you what types of radiation. So that's where the price jumps from knowing that there is radiation to what types of radiation goes all the way to $350 and goes into the industrial units that go all the way to $2,000 or $3,000.
Okay, well I know during our commercial break that Joe was talking about different types of radiation. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, one of my questions were exactly what you guys just touched up on is even if we got detectors and it became commonplace to be able to use radioactive detectors going into stores, testing our water, testing our groceries, testing the air. How do we know that those detectors would necessarily be able to detect all of the radioactive elements within that atmosphere, whether it's the air, whether it's the water? Because we know that there's uranium, there's plutonium, there's different types of radiation, and also the second question to that would be, like you mentioned earlier, we didn't know that there was a meltdown in 1977 in Japan until 2007. So how do we know that there's not several other different types of plants using different types of nuclear fusion processes that have different types of elements that few of us, if any of us, are even aware about? Maybe they're using a different type of element altogether other than uranium or plutonium that we're not aware about, so we would get a detector that would maybe cover this element, but not the three other elements that we're not even aware about as being a radioactive element. So, I mean, it's just a concern, because even if we get detectors and we want to play it safe, as it were, how are we sure that we're covering all our bases and not just 50%,
Well, all of my research shows me that even the base models will detect all types of radiation. It's the way the mechanism actually counts the photons that are coming off of the elements is what it's actually counting it. And the more sophisticated instruments will actually decipher what types of radiation there is. So let's go with breaking down what kind of radiation is coming from Fukushima. And we can start with iodine 131. And that is a radiation that attacks the thyroid gland. And we are able to protect ourselves from that with iodine pills or iodine solutions. This is where it gets more complicated now. Is the next most threatening is strontium 90. And strontium 90 is, I may be off on the effects here, but you'll get the gist. Strontium 90 mimics potassium in the body. So the body will absorb it naturally, thinking that it's potassium, and it will go right into your muscles and start causing problems. Cesium 134 and 137, they mimic calcium. So your body will naturally absorb it, thinking that it's calcium, and then that's where you get your leukemias from, is from the cesium 134 and 137. The uranium and plutonium, and I think they both do the same, they mimic iron. And then so that's how you get your blood cancers, is through the uranium and the plutonium. So the more sophisticated instruments will tell you which radiations are out there and prevalent, but it's the gamma radiations that do the most damage. Those are the ones that penetrate completely through anything except lead. And so unless we're all walking around with lead suits, there is no way to protect ourselves from it. We can only limit the amount of exposure and try to monitor the amount of exposure, meaning if we're standing directly next to the heater versus 100 feet away from the heater, the exposure is going to be different.
Sure.
So, I mean, isn't the government doing us a favor then? By not telling us, we don't have to worry about something that we can't change. I mean, if you're going to worry about it all the time, half the people are going to have an anxiety attack. Or is it better to know?
I think it's always better to know that you're being attacked, because that way you can use your energy not to worry, but to use your energy to find out ways of protecting yourself from it. What I've been doing is studying foods that we can eat that will build up our immune systems so that the cancers, even if they do start to manifest, will not prosper. As some of us know already, an acidic body is the home of cancer. And so if we build our bodies so that they're more alkaline, even if the cancers do start and fester, it will be very difficult for them to live in that environment if we got an alkaline body. So I've been learning ways to eat to bring my pH balance more to the alkaline side as a means of defense for what is happening. And that's the best that I've come up with so far, in addition to just staying as far away from it as possible.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah.
Can you name some of the foods that you consume on a regular basis to give the body that type of an environment?
Broccoli is one for sure. All of the deep, dark, leafy greens, the collard greens, turnip greens, mustard greens, kelp, kale, all of those are strong in alkaline.
Right.
And then of course the winner of all is alkaline water.
That's what I was going to ask you next, if you drink alkaline water specifically. And do you have a method for people to access alkaline water if they don't know anybody who produces that type of water? Is there like a self-production method for that?
There is a self-production method, but I'll come to that last.
Okay.
If you do a search on alkaline water, there are companies that Fuji water is the only commercial water that is at a 7.4, which is right at pH balance. All the rest of the purified waters and bottled waters are all on the acidic side.
That's the expensive one that's in the square bottle, right?
Yeah, the square. That's right.
The one that's like $4 a bottle.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's alkaline. There are alkaline drops that you can purchase that will alkaline your water in quantities, and there's also pills. And then I did a little more research on how to build my own alkaline ionizing machine, because they're selling machines out there as well. Mm-hmm. And I found a guy that put together an ionizer for $20. And that was just the cost of materials, and he filled it up with water. And 24-hour period, he had 2.5 gallons of alkaline water at 9.4 pH.
Wow.
For $20. And so that's my goal, is to reproduce what he's done.
Right.
So would you be willing to share that information if our listeners contacted you, Greg?
I will definitely do that, not a problem at all.
Okay, so we got to remember before the show's over to get your contact info.
Excellent.
And we can provide that. Okay, cool.
Are there any short-term effects to radiation that we're seeing in people who've been exposed? Is there any signs to watch
Oh
for?
yes, the signs are already here. We've got mutated fish, we have mutated vegetables, we have higher infant deaths that are directly related to radiation exposures. We have higher thyroid cancer rates. 2 weeks ago, an incident was brought to attention. The teachers in Malibu, 4 or 5 teachers all have thyroid cancer, and they're pointing the finger at the school as the culprit. But us behind the scenes, we know right away that the signs that they're talking about, the symptoms that they're having, are all radiation exposure symptoms. So it's there, and they're right on the coast.
So would you definitely stay away from sushi?
Oh, seafood's been off the menu for me for a whole year.
Yeah.
Don't be sad, dude.
In the we'll call it the truthers of the anti-nukes and the truthers about Fukushima, the running joke is stay untuned.
Yeah, that's funny. So let me just ask you this, especially a good way, I think, to end this topic and lead into your other ones is it a good thing to have nuclear power, or is there too much negative to possibly come out of having nuclear power plants?
I'm going to try and quote what Einstein said about this. And he said, nuclear power is a crazy way to heat water. there's many better ways of heating water without the side effects, and all it takes is one emergency, and you've just ruined the world.
Do you think they're doing it because it's cost effective, like cheap in essence?
No, it's a money machine, like the military-industrial complex. It is a way to fleece countries for their resources in exchange for so-called cheap electricity.
Very interesting. Okay, Vivian, what are you guys gonna segue us into
Well,
next?
one more on that topic. So, I agree with you for the most part. I know that there's a lot of alternative energy sources that not only governments but private sectors are looking into other than nuclear, because nuclear power, it has its benefits, but it definitely has its drawbacks. As the nuclear meltdowns, like you mentioned, have long-term effects, and who knows what that's going to do, not only today, not only 1 year from now, but 5, 10, 20, 50 years from now. And I know that they're looking into zero-point energies as a means to try to get energy or cheap energy on an alternative source. Are there any, or do you know of any major governments or private corporations that are already tapping into alternative energy sources and really trying to get away from nuclear power?
Government agencies,
Or private sector?
I would definitely say more private industry, and one that comes to my mind right now is a technology that's definitely being covered up, and it's called nano solar.
Yeah.
They have perfected liquid solar cells that they can just dip adhesive tape into, and they treat it a certain way, and that piece of tape is now a solar panel that you can put on all your windows. It will look just like tinted windows, and you now have solar panels to generate power on every window in your house.
Right.
And it's at a fraction of the cost of the solar panel systems that they're selling to us every day right now.
Right. That's a question. Are we ever going to see those solar panels, or is it just another one of those ideas we'll probably never touch in our
I
lifetime?
think it's going to get filed right along with the guy who just invented the car that does about 100 miles to the gallon off of water.
Yeah.
It's going to
There's plenty of inventions out there. One of the friends of the Broad Perspective has a box smaller than this table that'll power a skyscraper without electricity or gasoline. They're out there.
Wow.
They're out there.
Amazing.
It's just, you gotta dig deep to find them.
Yeah. So there's definitely a hoarding of energy to keep the systems in place that are here exist
You're right.
already, because it's all about hoarding. It's all about hoarding and controlling.
Yes, money and control.
Money and
Yeah,
control.
like everything. Well, so with that, when we leave this subject, what's the last thing you want us to know? Because we're going to move on to another subject. So regarding this Fukushima radiation, what's the last thing you want us to know on this?
I think we should all stay positive. I think we should all look for tomorrow, because tomorrow's going to be here whether we like it or not. I think there are ways of winning this war against Fukushima, but it's going to take people to wake up, pay attention, and demand more. And I think when that happens, when people realize that Fukushima is here, that the international community will put forth the efforts to solve this problem immediately, because heads are going to roll and people will be held accountable, and that's the last thing they want. They're depending on our ignorance to let this happen, because they have backup plans.
Well, isn't that the case with everything? Always counting on the sheeple's ignorance. I think let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll come back in just a moment with more of our discussion with Greg Barnes and our roundtable with everybody here in the studio audience. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Broad Perspective here on the Broad Perspective Network. We're continuing our discussion with Greg Barnes about conspiracies, fact or theory. We just finished talking about Fukushima, and now we want to talk about the TSA experience that just happened at LAX recently. And there was a young man who opened fire and killed a TSA agent and wounded some others. And I know, Greg, that you have serious opinions on this, so would you like to tell us what they are, please?
Well, if I had a flag to wave, I would wave the false flag on this one. Historically, people don't realize that with every disaster that America has encountered, 95% of them have all had a drill of the same nature to accompany it.
Don't worry, I do this sometimes
I did
myself
too. I've been
too.
doing a lot today.
You look back at 9/11, one of the most horrific situations we've had since Pearl Harbor. There was a drill going on the same week on the same topic, the same thing that was going on. They had a drill going on. It was in progress, and it just happened to go live at the same time that 9/11 happened. Well, if you look at your news reports, the LAX police captain openly admitted that they just had a drill on the exact same event 3 weeks ago, and he attributed the efficiency of his team to how well they were prepared because of the drill that they just did. Well, guess what else I noticed is that a lot of the live footage had victims or injured people that were actual dummies. Actual dummies. Look, just take a look, rewind, you will see it for your own self, which leads me to believe that about half of the live footage that they showed us of everything that was going on was footage from the drills that happened 3 weeks ago, which is exactly what they did at Sandy Hook. The same day Sandy Hook event happened, there was a drill about 1.5 miles away, and through some very creative forensic science people, they were able to put a very conclusive case together to show you just through the shadows that all of the footage that we saw at Sandy Hook did not happen at Sandy Hook because the shadows did not match the time of day that they gave for the incident. And it doesn't get any more complicated than that. So these false flag events, there's always a drill, whether they either practice it or they just go live with it.
When you say false flag, can you define that?
Sure. False flag goes all the way back to the shipping days where countries from, let's say it was France fighting a naval war with, say, Spain. And what they would do if they wanted to accomplish a goal is they would deliberately fly, the French would deliberately fly the Spaniard flag and then go and attack a port so they could say that Spain started it, and then they would retaliate. And so that's the history on false flag events. They would fly a false flag, and then they would create an incident to start the war. And so they're using that same event now.
That's interesting, yeah, and I noticed, just like what you were saying regarding the false flag at the TSA there, I noticed that it was also Mercury retrograde, which I thought was interesting myself, because including myself and a lot of other people, I know that they were just feeling lethargic and kind of out of it. So I wonder if that had anything to do with it, but I think you're absolutely right. There was that big thing that everybody pointed out on 9/11 when it did happen. Even the comptroller that was later recorded and released out to the public, he says, is this part of the drill or is this real world, as they're flying into the buildings? Because remember, the jet fighters that are there to protect that airspace, they detoured for about 7 minutes, the flights, before they actually hit the World Trade Center, and the comptroller was told to stand down, and they caught that on footage. And like you were mentioning earlier, there's, it's just so incidental that every single time something like this does happen, you can almost always put money on it that there was some kind of a drill almost identically replicating what had happened a few days or a few weeks prior. So, I mean, it's just the coincidence, you can't consider that coincidence, because this doesn't happen once, this doesn't happen twice, this happens, you can put money on it, you can bank on it, that if there was a quote-unquote terrorist incident, as it were, somewhere along the line, you could say, oh yeah, 1 week or 1 day ago or a few days ago, this happened exactly 5 miles away, and it was TSA agents, black ops agents, like you're mentioning, there's some dummy people that were either MKUltra or brainwashes, or they were just literally just figurines that partook in this whole incident that just so happened to exactly replicate 5 miles this way. So, I agree with you. I think there's always an agenda, and like I tell people all the time, out of all the news stories they can pump to you, they have 1 hour, and there's a reason that they'll pick this one over this one. So everything has a direct purpose and a consequence. So if you're seeing it on TV, you know, there was definitely an agenda, just like anything. Remember when they were doing, I don't want to stray off topic, but one more thing I will say is like, you know, they passed that huge NSA bill when they were pumping the whole gay rights marriage thing a few months ago, if you guys remember, and then they passed one of the biggest NSA spying bills the day they were supposed to decide on that bill. So it's just like these tactics are over and over and over and over, and it seems to work, unfortunately. But you're absolutely right that false flags are hard reality.
Diversions.
A diversion, sure.
A diversion. What do you think it's a diversion of?
Well, they like Joe said, there is definitely an agenda here, and the agenda is to now they want to use all of the weapons and ammunition that the Department of Homeland Security has been buying over the last year, which is total up to about 2.2 billion rounds in ammunition and about 300,000 weapons that are not used in practice. They are used for military uses. They are now going to use this incident to push the agenda of arming the TSA agents. So now when we go to the airport, it's going to look like Israel or something, where everyone's running around with AR-15s and strapped in vest and the whole 9 yards, and they're waiting for the boogeyman to jump out at any moment. And in the meantime, they get to further get the population accustomed to living in militarized situations, so that you'll be nice and comfortable going to the FEMA camp. You'll think it's in your best interest.
And you know, all of this stuff leads to a little interesting thing, because I always look back on history. That's something that I like to touch on and really understand the behavior of people. And a lot of this stuff touches on to, well, you know, people are going to say, well, why would your government do that? Or why would anybody want you to do something or give up something? And there's an awesome quote here by somebody the majority of humanity would consider evil. Many people would consider him evil, yet the way you're being trained and manipulated to think, you're going to behave like him or be controlled just like what he created in World War II. This quote goes like this: "The best way to take control over a people and control them utterly is to take a little of their freedom at a time, to erode rights by 1,000 teeny and almost imperceptible reductions. In this way, the people will not see those rights and freedoms being removed until past the point at which these changes cannot be reversed." That was Adolf Hitler. And that stuff's happening today. Everything you can imagine from media, propaganda, and everything that Hitler and the Nazi regime created is being implemented today. And that's what brings us to these false flag events. Because whether they're to divert you, to not see what else is being done behind the scenes, there is a motive behind why they're being created, to make you think a certain way, to give up certain things.
I agree with you 100%. And there are many that would equate where the American society is right now. We are in the same timeline as 1939 Germany. Every law that is being passed, the executive orders that our president is passing and writing into law on his own, they are literally duplicates of everything Hitler has done.
And it's funny, isn't it, that people would always say, how would so many thousands of people follow Hitler? Why would so many people follow them? Yet we're falling into that exact same pattern, aren't we?
Yes, we sure are. And it's through our ignorance, our complacency, our arrogance, our trust.
Maybe it's that American illusion, you know, that comfort level that we have, that we really don't have to hunt for food or struggle to live. And the only things we really think about, although many people would point out are very important, I really think they divert us from really concentrating on us as human beings. I really believe the fact that we have so much comfort in our lives is what leads us to give away so much of what so many other people would beg for in the rest of the world.
I agree with you 100% once again. And I would challenge any and everyone out there, whether you know this information or not, to look up the 4 steps for demoralization of a nation. The 4 steps for demoralization of a nation. And those 4 steps will show you the playbook at how over time they desensitize a society to what it they desensitize the society to not even know right from wrong anymore.
Just be complacent.
be complacent, be docile, and right is wrong, wrong is right, up is down, and they believe it. You think back for a minute, you know, everyone says, well, I'm cool, I'm a good person, I'm cool. Well, through our love of music, we were no longer cool, we became bad. And that was a good thing, to be bad, like Michael Jackson. These are the types of steps that they take to transform the mind and flip it upside down, where you don't know up from down anymore. Through the wording, through your life experience, through the pleasure of having fun because you're bad, they fed your ego, you're cool now, but guess what? Now being bad is acceptable. And then we had a wave of crime directly after it.
Oh, trust me, I completely, there's so many examples of that. I mean, just during the Reagan administration, I mean, you had Reagan inviting NWA to the White House to talk to him to not say kill cops or things like that, you know. They invited them to the White House because they knew the power this had. And that was the last time you ever heard any sort of trying to control what they'd say. And after that, it's just been, you know, F this, kill this, you know, drug dealing and all this crap. And you've had nothing but the, you know, and what's really interesting too is you've had nothing but a lack of education or being funds put into education. It's just like this whole media circus that is Jay-Z, that is all these other big artists, is what educates the youth and forms their culture, their customs, their sexuality, their desires and wants, all of this. And all of that comes from what the education is today, which is music, which is TV, and not anymore from what comes from the government, which is a really sad thing. It's like they saw, don't try to control these people. Let them do their thing, because they'll be, you know, let everybody, you know, don't try to tell people to say no. Don't try to tell people stop using drugs. Just let them do their thing, because they will create so much chaos. And I'm not, when I say people, I don't mean black, I don't mean white. I mean people in general. Let people just behave like animals. So it'll create this chaos, which eventually they'll want order out of it. And then they'll come screaming to us and wanting rules and regulations and help me do this and help me do that. Because you've had generation after generation of people just acting like wild beasts.
You touched on a really great point, and it makes me go right back to 1928, where a book was published called Propaganda. And it was by Edward Bernays with an S. And that book today is still the Bible for marketing. And so all the things that you just talked about is how our lives are changed through marketing. Our behavior is manipulated. What is valuable to us is all programmed into our minds through the medias, through music, through television, role models, you know, football, just, you know, the sports, the whole 9 yards. All of our behavior is constantly being programmed into us. Now, I like to say, you know, for the average person, you go to work in a day and you spend 8 hours, you know, pushing a piece of paper around and, you know, typing on the computer. Well, on the upper levels of going to work, there are think tanks where they spend 8 hours every day figuring out the exact catchwords that's going to make you jump and say how high when I say go. That's what they're doing. And we're all victims of it, and it's not until you understand that this program is in place where they are attacking you with every commercial. All 30 seconds of it is designed to make you do something you don't need to do. And once you start looking at it from that perspective, it is easier for you to take control of yourself, and eventually you get to see, what I like to say is, you start viewing TV and radio in 3 dimensions as opposed to 2 dimensions, where you can see behind the curtain. Every time they open their mouth, you can see exactly what's going on.
No, absolutely, and I agree. And all of this has to do with the really key word you use is perspective. Because that perspective is important. You know, there'll be people that'll listen to this and say, oh, it's so extreme to think false flag. Or, you know, or there's the other extreme, which is, you know, our government saving us from these crazy people with the AR-15s. But at the end of the day, you're not here to listen and say, oh, this guy's got the truth, or this Joe guy's smart, this Greg guy's smart, Vivian's got it figured out. That's not what it's about, because everybody's truth is different and everybody's life is different in the path you're going. What's true here is that everybody here is seeing a different perspective. Something different is happening, and all of that has to be credited. Because if you just see the world in one path, you never see everything else on the outside. And that's what's dangerous, because it creates a mob mentality, and in essence, the society will destroy itself.
With that, we're going to take a break. We'll be back in just a minute with the final segment of The Broad Perspective and our visit with Greg Barnes. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Broad Perspective here on the Broad Perspective Network. This is the last segment of our visit with Greg Barnes. And so we decided to ask you, Greg, what is the biggest conspiracy issue that's on the top of your mind right now?
Well, I'm going to answer that with a rhetorical question. And that rhetorical question would be, if you reach in your pocket and you pull out a dollar bill, I want you to ask yourself, is this cash, currency, or is it money? And the answer is the cash in your pocket is currency. It's a representation of a value. So basically, since 1971, it's a promissory note. Nixon took us off the gold standard. And so all the money that's in your pocket, I'm sorry, I correct myself, all the cash, the currency that's in your pocket is just representation of promises. So we go back to the rhetorical question, so what is money? And for 6,000 years, money has always been gold and silver. Now why is that relevant in everyone's life? Because we are in the transition, we're in the middle of the biggest transfer of wealth in global history. The United States is about to lose its position as the reserve currency of the world. And there's all kinds of evidence to support that on a daily basis. Things are happening where the transition is taking place. And you look at the stock market and you say, the stock market's going up and everything's going well and we're in a recovery. Well, that would be smoke and mirrors to the 10th degree. This country is literally turning into a second world nation right before your eyes. And if we don't get ourselves ready for that, we are going to be in a situation like Haiti was directly after its earthquake, looking for aid, but nobody's coming to save us. And we'll have to defend for ourselves for who knows how long while this transition continues to take place. China made an announcement 2 Saturdays ago, and they said in its main newspaper, a message to the world: de-Americanize yourself and prepare for the New World Order. 3 days after that, South Korea made trade agreements with several Asian nations to no longer use the US dollar for trading and settlement of international transactions. I'm not sure what the number is now, but as of January, 63% of the modernized world were already in agreements to no longer use the US dollar as a world reserve currency. So January, Australia made the same agreements. Switzerland, 2 weeks ago, made those agreements. And the UK, that's what I was thinking about. The UK just made those agreements 3 weeks ago to no longer use the US dollar to settle international trade agreements.
So what should we use?
Well, we all need to start learning Mandarin. and right now, we need to be preparing ourselves for this transition, because when they allow the US dollar to collapse, and I do believe we are a lot closer than the world thinks we are, we are going to be living in a Walking Dead scenario where if you don't have the means to feed yourself, clothe yourself, medicate yourself, and protect yourself, you're probably not going to make it to the other side of this transition of wealth. This is recorded in history. It happens all the time. So this isn't a once-in-a-lifetime scenario. This happens all the time, except for this time it's going to happen on a global level. And the only time that has happened, we have to go all the way back to Rome. You have to look at yourself and say, I'm kind of educated. Rome was the greatest empire in the world. It had the biggest army in the world. So why is Rome no longer in that status anymore? How did it die? What killed Rome? And it died from within. It died from its financial system, where the good money eroded all the way down to promissory notes like we have today, and the whole world is using promissory notes. The entire world is robbing Peter to pay Paul, and it's time to pay the piper. I did it.
So it's about fiat currency.
It's all about fiat currency. And if you do a search on the history of fiat currency, you will see that there is a 100% track record that once a nation starts to use fiat currency, it ends in a complete financial collapse and has to completely rebuild itself from zero.
I do see that. I hear that a lot. I read that a lot. I don't think that you're blowing smoke. So what's the solution to that?
Well, when you say the solution, most people are going to read that as, how do we fix what is broken? And unfortunately, there is no fix. There is no fix that will actually happen. But let's look at the two options. The natural fix would be complete global debt forgiveness. In other words, your Social Security, you have to say, you know what, never mind, I don't want it now. I'd rather fix my country. So take all my Social Security. My retirement accounts that I've been working my whole entire life, you know what, you guys can have it. I'm just going to live off of poverty and I'll be okay. And all of the investors that just have billions and billions of dollars, which has everybody else's retirement accounts connected to that, they also have to say, you know what, never mind, we're not going to worry about that. And that's just unnatural. It's not going to happen.
So, I mean, maybe that's why the NSA and everybody's getting so many bullets, because we're going to get to that point and nobody's just going to say, yeah, sure, take my stuff.
You're absolutely right. They understand exactly how this financial system was built from day one. They know the life cycle of it. They know how it's going to end, and they've been preparing for that. And that's exactly why the Department of Homeland Security is here for Homeland Security. They have 2 billion rounds of ammunition. Who's that for? They're not the U.S. Army. They're not the military. Who's that for? They're not going to go fight an international war. So they are preparing. And so you have to prepare for what is getting ready to happen, because you don't want to be one of the people that is forced into the streets and have to participate in the riots, because they have a game plan for that, and they got a FEMA camp for you to house you in. And you don't want to go there because it's a one-way ticket.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I don't know if we have enough time, but one thing that's intrigued me about this whole financial crisis is I know that the Federal Reserve is a byproduct of the International Monetary Fund, which is located in Europe. But my question is, if the whole world is indebted to a sovereign creditor, as they always call when you really start backtracking this, who is this sovereign creditor, and what is it exactly that they credit that we're in debt to them for, if it's not a fiat currency or if it's not a gold?
Okay, that's a very good question, and the answer is the international banking system is the they that we always talk about is controlling the world. They control countries and nations through the controlling of their monies. And when you talk about their values, the system, the Ponzi scheme that they set up in every country is to print money out of thin air that they don't have, but they consider it, they tell you that it has value based on promises, and then you operate and use it to trade, and then when you pay back the loans to them, they take that money back, and then they buy real tangible assets, which is all of your property and all of your castles and all of your everything else.
It's a scam, essentially.
It's a big giant scam. And so that's why the kings and queens have all these elaborate palaces and we have nothing.
Well, with that, we're going to have to take this up on another show. Tell us your contact info.
You can email me at mr.dolezal ERACISM @gmail.com. That's my email address, and you will be responded to by Truth Be Told Now, which is my alias.
Okay, Mr.Racism
At gmail.com.
Cool. Thanks for joining us, Greg. It's been a pleasure. Stay tuned, same time, same place next week, where it's all perspective. Join us and broaden yours. Thanks for listening.
Lovely.